Good evening. I am Dr. Avinash Gupta, Chief of Cardiology at Monmouth Medical Center, Southern Campus in New Jersey, USA. I am practicing medicine and cardiology in United States of America for last 34 years, and I have been in the middle of this COVID-19 epidemic. It is an honor and privilege to be invited to a webinar where Chief Patron Professor Ramesh Kumar Pandey, Vice Chancellor of Ranchi University, of which I was a student in 1970s, and Patron Professor Manju Sinha, Principal Ranchi Women's College. Many thanks to convener Professor Icha Purak and all the organizers. Today's topic is plants as immunomodulators. And as we all know, it's a new virus. It's an animal virus which usually does not affect humans, but this virus made the jump. And since it is a new virus, nobody is immune to it, and everybody is susceptible. That's why it's spreading so fast. And since we don't have a cure yet and no vaccines yet, it makes sense to think about how we can prevent it and how we can use plants as immunomodulation, because it has everything to do with our body's immunity. Some people get only mild symptoms and get away with it, and some people could die from it. They get very sick, they need ICU, they need ventilator. So let's talk about the coronavirus. They are important human and animal pathogens. At the end of 2019, a novel coronavirus was identified as the cause of a cluster of pneumonia cases in Wuhan, a city in the Hubei province of China. It rapidly spread, resulting in an epidemic throughout China, followed by an increasing number of cases in other countries throughout the world. Understanding of COVID-19 is still evolving. The virology says that it's a full genome sequencing and phylogenetic analysis indicates that the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 is a beta coronavirus in the same subgenus as the severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS virus, as well as several bat coronaviruses, but in a different clade. The structure of the receptor binding gene region is very similar to that of the SARS coronavirus, and the virus that has been shown to use the same receptor, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 or ACE2 for cell entry. So if you can find some mechanism to block that receptor through which the virus enters the cell, we may be successful in preventing it. And also we will have to look for drugs which can prevent the replication of virus once it enters the body, whether it is allopathic or Ayurvedic, or we can find it in the plants. It will be helping the patient. The closest RNA sequence similarly The closest RNA sequence similarity is to two bat coronaviruses, and it appears likely that bats are the primary source. Whether COVID-19 virus is transmitted directly from bats or through some other mechanism, example through an intermediate host, is unknown. So globally, more than 8 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been reported. And cases have been reported in all continents except for Antarctica. And the cumulative incidence depends on a number of factors, including population density and demographics, extent of testing and reporting, and timing of mitigation strategies such as lockdown. In the United States, outbreaks in long-term facilities and homeless shelters have emphasized the risk of exposure and infection in congregate settings. A prime example is this largest slum in the world, Dharavi. And actually, if you look at the whole thing, India has done much better in preventing the spread than America. Our lockdown was done on time, Unfortunately, the migrant laborers had to go to their homes, and they brought the coronavirus to their villages. But in Dharavi, they did similar to what they did in China. In China, they had fever clinics. So they were testing everybody's fever when they were in the bus stand or shopping mall, and anybody with fever was sent to the fever clinic, not to the hospital, not to the doctor's offices. And when they went to the fever clinic, they had a rapid COVID test, and they were made to wait there till the result was available. Once the result is negative, they went home to self-quarantine. And if it is positive, they were not sent to the hospital again. They were sent to the stadiums or the hotels where they were quarantined for 14 days and treated there. In Dharavi also, they did the same thing. They knocked on the doors of everybody. They checked their temperature, they checked their oxygen saturation, and they were sent to the schools or sports complexes. Understanding of transmission, at the beginning of outbreak, an initial association with a seafood market that sold live animals where most patients had worked or visited was made. But however, as the outbreak progressed, person-to-person spread became the main mode of transmission. Current outbreak in Beijing last week also is traced to a wet market. And they have taken steps in sealing off the area, and they have cancelled flights, and they are preventing people from leaving Beijing. I wish the same was done for Wuhan. Route of person-to-person transmission is in severe acute respiratory distress syndrome is thought to occur through close-range contact, mainly via respiratory droplets. So there are two things. One is a droplet and the other is aerosol. So the droplets virus released in the respiratory secretions when a person with infection coughs, sneezes, or talks can infect another person if it makes direct contact with the mucous membranes, which is either the eyes or the nose or the mouth. Infection can also occur if a person touches an infected surface and then touches his eyes, nose, or mouth. Droplets typically do not travel more than 6 feet, about 2 meters. So that's where the social distancing comes in, where you have to stay 6 feet away from anybody who is suspected to have COVID. And this day and time, we have to assume that everybody has COVID because 80% of cases are asymptomatic. So you have to be careful. And if the younger people think that, it's only going to affect elderly and people with comorbidities, then if you are going out, if you are getting COVID, then you are going to bring it home and infect your parents and grandparents. Whether SARS virus can be, whether COVID virus can be transmitted through the airborne route, through particles smaller than droplets that remain in the air over time and distance under natural conditions, has been a controversial issue. The viral shedding and period of infectivity, it appears that SARS-CoV-2 can be transmitted prior to the development of symptoms and throughout the course of illness, particularly early in the course. Detection of viral RNA does not necessarily indicate the presence of infectious virus. Thus, prolonged viral RNA detection following the resolution of illness does not necessarily indicate infectiousness. So if a person gets a test positive for COVID and then he is treated, he gets better, he is asymptomatic, but he is still, his test is positive, does not mean he is infective because it could be a dead virus he may be harboring. Usually they are infectious for first 8 days of illness, but not after that. Transmission as I said, has been documented from asymptomatic individuals also. The risk of transmission from an individual with COVID varies by the type and duration of exposure, use of preventive measures, and likely individual factors. Example, the amount of virus in respiratory secretions. Most secondary infections have been described among household contacts, in congregate or healthcare settings when personal protective equipment was not used, including hospitals, long-term care facilities, and in closed settings such as cruise ships. However, reported clusters of cases after social or work gatherings such as wedding, funeral, also highlight the risk of transmission through close non-household contact. Contact tracing in the early stages of epidemics at various locations suggested that most secondary infections were among household contacts with a secondary attack rate of up to 15%. Clusters of cases have also been reported following family, work, or social gatherings where close personal contact can occur. And environmental contamination can happen too. Virus present on contaminated surfaces can be another source of infection if susceptible individuals touch these surfaces and then transfer infection virus to mucous membranes in the mouth, eyes, or nose. Such as if you touch the handles, light switches, bed and handrails, interior doors, windows, toilet bowls, sink basin, you can infect yourself. And it can persist on surfaces for up to 6 to 9 days. Less on the paper and cardboard. That's why when we get the mail, we leave it outside in the garage for a day. Any mails which are delivered, we disinfect it with alcohol wipes. And in plastic, it can stay longer for about a week, so we leave it outside. Of course, frequent hand washing is very important. You must have heard that you have to wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds. But if you are out and if you don't have facility to wash your hands, then hand sanitizer with more than 65% of alcohol is good enough. So somebody who gets COVID, they develop antibodies to the virus. And how long this antibody will be protective, we don't know yet, because it's only like we are dealing it with for last 3 to 6 months. Because there is no cure and no treatment and no vaccine, the primary goal is to prevent it. So I always say that, you build up your immunity when you are in lockdown. Eat well, sleep well, do exercise, yoga, meditation, pranayam helps. Pranayam actually expands your lungs, and this virus mainly affects the lungs. So that's a very effective way of preventing this disease and building up your immunity. And all the things which have been recommended by Ayush Ministry of Government of India, they should be done, because it won't cure COVID, but it will actually improve your health, and it can prevent COVID and give your body more ammunition to fight it. So again, if diligent hand washing, use of hand sanitizer, covering the cough or sneezes with the elbow, don't touch your eyes, nose, and mouth. Clean and disinfect the objects and surfaces that are frequently touched. These things cannot be overemphasized. Of course, the people who are elderly and they have multiple comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, renal disease, diabetes, hypertension, lung disease, they have to be extra careful. So if the question is, if you do get it, what do you do? So it's not a life, death sentence, because 81% of cases will be mild and they will have no or mild pneumonia. And then 14% will get severe short of breath, low oxygen, and they will need hospitalization. But only 5% will get critical, requiring ICU with respiratory failure, shock, and multi-organ dysfunction. And case fatality rate could be anywhere from 2 to 7%. Like in Italy, it was 7.2%. In South Korea, it was only 0.9%. So it also depends on advanced age, underlying medical condition, which I mentioned. When you get it, you have to know when to go for testing and when to go to the hospital. So when you start to get sick, consider that as day one. And in day one or two, you will feel fatigue, loss of appetite, loss of sense of smell, and loss of sense of taste. And on day 3, you can get fever, cough, itchy throat. Day 4, you'll get headache on and off. Day 5, you'll have gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea, abdominal cramps, headache, and fever. On day 6 and 7, more body pain, less headache, diarrhea, and or upset stomach. On day 8 or 9, either you are getting better or worse. Worse if you have fever, cough, and shortness of breath. The most common reason for going to the hospital is shortness of breath. And once you are short of breath, don't delay it, because people come to the hospital short of breath in the morning and by afternoon they are on ventilator. Day 8 to 13, there is increased risk of blood clots. So that time they should be ambulating. And it is an average of 8 to 9 days to development of shortness of breath to the onset of pneumonia, pneumonitis. It is not like influenza, which has a classically sudden onset. Fever can last up to 12 days, and weakness will take up to 3 weeks. Appetite usually comes back in 2 weeks. So keep a thermometer at home, check your temperature. If you can get a pulse oximeter, you can check your oxygen saturation, and call your doctor if you have any symptom. The complications of COVID could be acute respiratory distress syndrome. It can affect the heart with arrhythmias, acute cardiac injury, and shock. It can cause pulmonary embolism or acute stroke because of the blood clots. So basically, people thought that it's a respiratory virus, it will cause pneumonia, but it's not or acute respiratory distress syndrome, but it's neither. It is blood clots in the alveoli, in the blood capillaries of the lung, and it hampers the oxygen exchange. So basically, why does it happen? It's interesting that some people are getting away with it and have only mild symptoms, like 81%. But why do some people get sick? They go on ventilator and eventually die. And I have to say that about 80 to 90% patients who will go on ventilator will die. So this also has to do with immunity. So I will end my talk with this last thing, which is called cytokine storm. So our own immune system is to blame for the intense illness some people are experiencing. The immune system is there to help us fight infection, and usually it does. But sometimes it goes rogue, wreaking more havoc than the disease itself. It's called cytokine storm. What happens is, imagine that you put your foot on the accelerator and then it gets glued to it. You can't get your foot off the gas to slow down your car. So essentially, these storms can be more deadly than the original virus the body is fighting, and that causes multi-organ failure. So most of the COVID-19 patients experiencing cytokine storms are presenting with fevers and shortness of breath, then having so much difficulty breathing, they eventually require ventilation. And this typically occurs about 6 to 7 days after the onset of illness. So that's why it's important to know the timeline. As far as treatment is concerned, there are several interventions. For mild patients, we use different medication. For moderate patients, we need different medications. And for severe symptoms, the ventilation, intubation, and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation called ECMO is used. And nowadays, we are collecting patients' blood who have recovered and have antibodies, and we are giving it to patients who are sick. It's called convalescent plasma. And all these treatment are still evolving, and unless we do multi-center, double-blind, randomized controlled trial, we cannot really say which one will be more effective. So we still have to see, but if we can find out from our Ayurvedic or plants immunomodulators also who is at most risk, and is there a way we can prevent a storm before it happens? Can preemptive strategies and therapies be successful? Once a storm happens, can we treat it effectively with mediator blockers or other medications that interfere with the cytokine storm pathway? So all these are important questions, and we are still waiting. And I would end my talk there and take any questions. And I thank all the organizers again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.